India's economic journey reads like an epic blockbuster. In 1947, it was a broken, exploited nation, robbed of wealth and stripped of industry. Today, in 2025, it towers over Japan in nominal GDP, its $4.19 trillion economy powering industries from IT to manufacturing and from space tech to fintech. The transformation was neither instant nor easy. It was forged through crisis, reform, ambition and grit. The climb has been steep, the view now breathtaking. But how exactly did a once impoverished colony rewrite its destiny to stand shoulder to shoulder with global giants? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. The India of independence was a nation of contradictions, rich in culture and resources, poor in infrastructure and opportunity. The British exit left a shell. 75% of people trapped in agriculture, a per capita income of just rupees 240, and literacy barely scraping 17%. Heavy industries were scarce, banking fragile, and poverty everywhere. For decades, socialist planning and licensed Raj aimed for self-reliance but strangled competition. Only in 1991, facing a currency crisis, did India tear down its economic walls. From there began an unprecedented rise. But was the surge inevitable, or did a few critical turning points change everything? When the Union Jack came down, India inherited an economy warped by nearly 2 centuries of colonial extraction. The British had perfected the art of draining wealth, exporting raw cotton, tea and spices while flooding the market with cheaper Manchester textiles that decimated local industries. Railways? They carried raw materials to ports, not prosperity to villages. The economy was overwhelmingly rural, but food security was absent. Famines were a grim memory, and industrial hubs were rare exceptions. Independence was political liberation, but economically, India was on life support. The real challenge was not winning freedom, but surviving it.
We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England. That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer, went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. Meanwhile, colonialists like Robert Clive bought their rotten boroughs in England on the proceeds of their loot in India, while taking the Hindi word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him. By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43 is simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark.
India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru's vision was bold: a self-reliant India, free from foreign dependency, powered by state-led industrialization. Planning Commission's 5-year plans became the central script for development. The early focus was on irrigation, power and heavy industry, laying the groundwork for steel plants, dams and public enterprises. Green Revolution of the 1960s banished grain shortages, turning India food secure. But alongside the achievements came the license Raj, a maze of permits and controls that suffocated entrepreneurship. By the 1980s, the Hindu rate of growth, a modest 3.5% per year, had become a national punchline. The dream was alive but sluggish. By the late 1980s, cracks in the socialist fortress were impossible to ignore. Debt was mounting, exports lagging, and foreign reserves shrinking. Some timid deregulation crept in, but the global tide was shifting. The Soviet Union, India's old ally, was collapsing, and markets everywhere were opening. For India, the breaking point came in 1991, a balance of payments crisis so severe that the country had barely 2 weeks of import cover left. The government quietly pledged gold to the IMF. Survival demanded more than patchwork fixes. It demanded a radical rewrite of the economic rulebook. Enter Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, armed with a new economic policy.
Our economy, polity and society have to be made extraordinarily resilient and alert if we are to take full advantage of the opportunities and to minimize the risks associated with the increasing globalization of economic processes. We have to accept the need for restructuring and reform if we are to avoid an increasing marginalization of India in the evolving world economy. The economic policy changes brought about by our government under the inspiring leadership of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao in the last 8 months are inspired by this vision. Sir, our party is an inheritor of great traditions of national service. True to this heritage, we commit ourselves to providing a firm and purposeful sense of direction to the reform process so that this ancient land of India regains its glory and rightful place in the comity of nations. This budget represents a contribution to the successful implementation of this great national enterprise of building an India free from the fear of war, want and exploitation, an India worthy of the dreams of the founding fathers of our republic. We shall pay any price, bear any burden, make any sacrifice to realize those dreams. India is on the move again. We shall make the future happen. Sir, I have come to the end of my labor. Tonight, I feel like going to the theatre. Let the assassins be informed. I am prepared to meet their onslaughts. As the poet said, सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए कातिल में है.